Hello to everybody at the NewYork Festival. My name is Ella Robertson-McKay, and I'm the Managing Director of One Young World, the Global Forum for Young Leaders. And I am so thrilled to be bringing you two very inspiring young leaders from our community today who are going to tell you what they're imagining and, most importantly, the steps they are taking to make their visions for the future a reality.
Thanks so much, Ella. My name is Zubair. I am the founder of a social impact startup called Zenotes, and we're on a mission to end education inequality, and we've reached over 3.5 million students in our efforts. I'm also a passionate advocate for SDG 4, and I do this through multiple ways. First off, as a one-year-old ambassador, I'm also a national youth leader for GPE, the Global Education Fund, and I'm a youth advisory board member at the EY Foundation, ensuring that young people are enabled to get access to quality education and support.
So my name is Ibijoke, and I am the founder and the CEO of ElectHER. So as the name implies, we are getting the next generation of competent and progressive women across elective and appointed offices across Africa, just to tackle the inequality gap we have in African democracy, and also reimagine our approach to socioeconomic advancement and progression on the continent.
Getting women into politics is my personal passion outside of work as well, and I spend a lot of time campaigning on that. And we've got International Women's Day coming up this weekend, so no better time to be talking about that. But I suppose the real exciting thing about the NewYork Festival is that it asks us to look to an optimistic future, to look beyond our reality and to think about how we could experience a different future and how future generations may not have to live with some of the burdens that we live with today. So Zubair, tell us why education is such a fundamental building block into building a better future, whether that's from a climate perspective, a political perspective, an economic perspective, and why SDG 4 is the sustainable development goal that you're such a passionate advocate on.
For me, education goes back to my personal story, and not even my personal, but my family's story, and how we were able to go through social mobility and able to access education, and that was the enabler for us to have access to a better life. And that connection has kind of transmitted through me, and I want to ensure that everyone does have equal opportunities to access. And education provides that. It deeply interlinks with every other SDG. Knowledge and education is, clearly works with healthcare. You will be more knowledgeable about how to approach things like misinformation. It links with economic and well-being. How do you go about getting a job, because education is interlinked there. I think that my personal story interlinked with the fact that each of these SDGs are so, education is so imperative to them all, is why I'm so passionate about it. And I think that's why we must ensure that every young person or everyone has access to quality, equitable education.
Oh, beautifully expressed. And Ibijoke, why is female gender equality such an important cornerstone in terms of a more positive future? Because I know your ambition is to get women are more than 50% of the population, so they should hold 50% of political offices, and I know you want to achieve that by 2050. Why is that what you've chosen to dedicate your life to?
My personal experience growing up in a highly patriarchal environment, and how that limits or undermines your abilities or capacity as a woman. But also I think it's a matter of urgency and survival. So when you look at Africa, the numbers, Nigeria is the largest economy in Africa, one of the fastest growing youth population. Half of our population are women, and an exclusion of women from governance and decision making means that we can truly never alleviate poverty. We can get more kids into school. Our socioeconomic indicators are very poor as well. So for me, like I said, it's a matter of survival to ensure that we can actually get Africa to where it's supposed to be. And one of the most fundamental issues or challenges or barriers that we have in Africa is that of leadership. If we don't fix our leadership problem, we can't get it right. We can't imagine a better world if we don't get leadership right. So for me, what I imagine is a world where men and women can come together to formulate policies, to make decisions that are very pertinent to the continent. And so that is why I'm doing this work that I'm so passionate about. And in fact, we are preparing for the next general elections in Nigeria, and my organization will be directly supporting a couple of competent women to come out in the election. So it's a very interesting time to be alive.
I'm so inspired by this, and I'm looking forward to more just conversations offline around this really, really important issue, which ultimately is underpinned by education. Because as you say, we need competent leaders, and there are lots of great women, or lots of women who actually aren't great. They happen to be women, and that's something. But they're not the most competent leaders. They're still corrupt, or whatever it might be. And ultimately, we need equitable education to ensure that we don't just get gender representation, but we get representation from different racial groups. We get different representation from different socioeconomic backgrounds. It shouldn't be that all of our leaders come from, a wealthy background. We need people who've got different life experiences to have an effective legislative function. So Zubair, educational inequality is still really profound around much of the world, and you started addressing this as when you were just 16, and you've really had, as you said, a huge impact since then. Talk to us about how you might work towards a future where education inequality is something of the past. How are you achieving that, and what might we be able to expect in the future to inspire our audience today?
The approach that Xenos took was unplanned, unprescribed. It was one where we decided as a movement, as a youth-led movement, to address the problems we were facing. And that approach is, of course, much more relatable than anything a systemic change can do, right? Because it's bottom up. It is about empowering young people, very much like you, going in the same academic trajectories as you, and understanding their pains and problems. So at the age of 16, when I witnessed that, here I was doing an exam which would be taken by hundreds of thousands of people, the exact same one, and yet some would have access to relevant textbooks and good teaching and possibly even tutors, while others would struggle to pay entrance fee to this exam. It just did not sit right with me. Actually, Sir Ken Robinson's TED Talk is one that inspired me many, many years ago. I can still remember as a 13, 14-year-old remembering listening to that clip and thinking, imagine if. And in many ways, that's what it kicked off. And organically, this approach of student-empowered and community-led learning has become one that is synonymous with hundreds of thousands of people all over the world. And as we transition and look to address education inequality, this is what I would be very, very strongly opinioned about as well, that we must transition from this past approach where students are simply consumers of educations to actually the producers, creators, and proponents of it. Unless we make sure that the students are inspired by and are in the center of our education system and not just simply beneficiaries, which we're trying to figure out as a systems approach in terms of like, oh, how can we make this more efficient so we can make more profit out of a school business? Unless we change that dogma and that mentality, we're not going to be addressing education inequality. And on the point that was earlier made as well, girls' education is an even bigger problem, and especially in the global south, where they're not just access to educational opportunities lacking, but actually there's so many challenges within the societal structures and understanding within families about whether and how important it is for girls to be educated. So there is education inequality, and as we dive into the intersectionalities, we face even further challenges. And I think that if we can transform it so that it's a bottom-up approach, if we can make sure that young girls who understand the challenges that other young girls are facing, if they're taking an approach or being more synonymous with each other, that would ensure that whatever we create will be equitable, will be accessible, will be a global education.
For young people, by young people, and that's something that we really try and live at One Young World. Ibijoke, I think that similarly, a lot of that will echo with you, is that you are for women, by women, and hoping that female policy creators will create great policies that will benefit women in Nigeria. But let's turn to tactics slightly. So if there are other women around the world going, yes, we are underrepresented in parliament, or we're underrepresented on the board in the corporation that I work from, how is ElectHER going about actually improving female representation, and what advice do you have for other women and men? Because let's face it, lots of men want to see more gender equality too, who are working around the world to actually see results and see an improvement in female representation in leadership.
No, thank you so much, Ella. So, I totally agree with you. Male allyship is so important because, again, I will come back to my continent. If you're trying to to address patriarchy, you definitely need to get the, the main players in that space on the table to actually reason with you as well. So I think people need to move from that space of talking to gender as, gender inequality as a woman's issue to everyone's issue. And I think the more we'll look at that from that lens, that helps to, pretty much have a more rounded approach to tackling gender inequality. But in terms of specific steps, and countries or areas where women are still underrepresented, I think walking the talk is important. I think also leveraging the power of community as well. There's something that the men do. It is informal community building. Like I told someone that I was in a room last election cycle in Nigeria, and you just had a bunch of guys. A guy wanted to run for office, called 1 friend, 2 friends, 3 friends, mobilized resources and money. From where I stand, women still cower a little bit. You want to be perfect. You don't want to get in there. It's seize the opportunity, build your social network. Just don't wait to get it right. There's something profound that I always quote from Michelle Obama's post, and that is, we will not wait for the world to feel equal before we start feeling seen, heard, and respected. And I think that's what women need to, so take the bull by the horn. There's also the global push for gender equality. This is the time to ride on it. There's something I always say, that ElectHER is a very timely initiative. Had we come 5 years ago, would we have achieved a lot more? I don't think so. But I think that there's so much happening that is connecting the world together. The past 2 years with the COVID pandemic also sort of gave an exposure to the world, where you're seeing women in those countries push for more progressive approaches to tackling the COVID pandemic, taking people-centric decisions. And that gives you a perspective to how women live differently from men. It's not as if men are better than women, but it is just that when you have a balanced perspective and leadership, all of society is included. And I think that's what we must aim for. So from where I stand, for example, ElectHER started as an idea. Like I said, it was, I wouldn't say accidental, but it was just an idea all over the place, right? But so many things have happened in the world, from the NSAS campaign that happened in Nigeria, where people were fighting against police brutality. But what was so instrumental in that, we seized the moment. The infrastructure that drove that campaign was women. Young women. In Africa, we're so fond of talking about problems, but we are forgetting to really harness the solutions and those problems. So for so long, we've been capitalizing and talking on brain drain. But for me, these can be channeled to brain gain as well. So a lot of foreign direct investment you're seeing from Africa right now is coming from diaspora community, but also the NSAS campaign was such a powerful campaign and a social touch point for a lot of people. Now, that campaign was sustained in Nigeria, first of all, by women. A lot of women were at the forefront, alternative financing through NFTs, global fundraising. And you had a lot of people from the diaspora community that moved money into Nigeria that helped people sustain the process. So people, my generation are finding a new perspective to activism, a new perspective to gender equality, saying no one is now questioning the competency of women, because over the past 2 years, especially on the continent, we've seen a lot of uprising and women led this successfully.
And then Zubair, coming to you on tactics, I think so much of what Ibijoke said about mobilizing resources, pushing public discourse, there were so many useful tactics in there. I think one of the challenges that you faced obviously was being 16 when you started your initiative, and that comes with its own structural challenges. So in terms of tactics, then when you were getting going as a 16-year-old and now, what's some advice that you have for young people who are wanting to push for educational equality around the world?
It has been tough, but it also, being young is also a very valuable approach or a criteria when you're addressing social challenges. You may be considered naive, but you also have this beautiful creativity and unhindered look of the world. You do really believe in things like educational access to be available to all. And unfortunately, as I've grown up and I've seen the world, I've become a little bit jaded about the fact that, I never realized this, but there are people in this world who don't want equality in education. That blows my mind. I honestly, I cannot fathom it, but it's true, because people want certain social classes and certain financial abilities to have a different access to or different level of quality of education. So that naivety and that kind of looking for the best in the world is incredibly beneficial. The approach that we took, and I kind of iterate from what I said earlier, is taking a community-led approach. It's taking a bottom-up approach. And when you want to address social challenges, I always talk about address things that come from home, address challenges that you see and witness and face on a day-to-day basis. There are global challenges and there are so many of them, but if you start for those that you can really understand and you have a community around that you can address and converse with and understand better with, you will always be able to innovate and iterate on those ideas to develop relevant solutions. The approach that I would always also advise on is to take a community-led approach. So once you do identify a solution, build people and find people around you who would support you. I talk about what Xenos has done, but I would not be here recording a session with you if it wasn't for hundreds of contributors and team members who've supported this mission. And I think if there's one thing I'm proud about, it's not about starting Xenos, it's about the fact that young people who are 16, 17, 18, who have just decided to spend hours, hundreds of hours, dedicating their time towards what we started. And that kind of power, that kind of resource is simply impossible to get if you're going to take it through a very, very systemic approach. You need to do it with community in mind. You need to empower those people facing the problem. And you will be surprised at how quickly and how often you will be getting feedback, suggestions, and improvements. I mean, we just literally launched a small feature this morning, and in our community already, we've had like 3 or 4 comments, some telling us great stuff about what we've done and some advising us some other features to develop. And it is not planned. I'm not asking them for anything. And here I am getting a continuous feedback loop from young people who are facing the challenge and advising us on how to approach this problem further. So if you can build that community around you, it is the most powerful thing that can allow you to not only create a solution, but actually propagate and continue to develop and grow it.
Amazing. So I've got two questions, which I think we could do with a little bit quicker, because those were really great, fulsome answers. First of all, on creativity, because I think that's one of the great things about the NewYagineif Festival, is that this is really about not just tackling problems, but bringing our creativity and a variety of skills, not just strategy and fundraising and so on. So Ibijoke, tell us about how you've infused ElectHER with creativity, and members of your community are taking really creative approaches to achieve your mission.
This is one question that I love answering, because this really embodies everything we stand for at ElectHER as a disruptive organization. So, there's something I tell my team always: politics needs to be cool. We need to be the cool kids on the block. So essentially you shouldn't, because we put politics up there and it feels like, oh my God, it's so serious, it's so formal. But in order to welcome a new generation of conscious citizens, we need to make sure it's cool. We need to make sure it's relatable. So for example, from my end, Afro-pop, music, or entertainment, or culture is a big global export at the moment. And so for horses, that is a huge point of entry. So last year, for example, we had an art exhibition around International Women's Day. We commissioned different artists to just imagine and just create conversational pieces around what women in society mean to them. And from there, we could get collectors, we could get celebrities and influencers who would not necessarily involve themselves in politics. And it was a night of food, of canapes, of conversations. But what happened was people were so comfortable enough to discuss in politics and the state of the nation without feeling overwhelmed. And so that's, I think that, the user-centric approach is so important to understand that there's a demand and a supply. You're just not creating solutions because they make you feel good as an organization, but you're actually storytelling. So for me, I really believe in storytelling. ElectHER has produced 3 documentaries now from different viewpoints. Later this year, to fundraise for some of our candidates, we're going to be having a concert, just, global citizen style, because music, like I said, is a huge touch point. And for us, as creating storytelling around that music is going to be so powerful. We're looking to do the Lagos Fashion Week as well. And I told my team, I said, let's do something disruptive. Everybody's looking at fashion, but fashion with consciousness as well. So these are the ways we're reimagining so that everyone, every strata of society has a connection point that's drawing them into politics, especially because we have an election coming. And to be honest, the opportunity cost of apathy is too high for my country right now. So the goal is we cannot think traditional approach. We need to do traditional, we need to leverage the power of technology. I love what Zubir said about community-led approach. Is one of the most fundamental approaches as well, but also infusing art, culture, and storytelling to ensure that everyone, feels like a part of the movement we're trying to push.
I love that. I think it's so important to meet people where they are. Everyone's going to get to where you want them to be eventually, but you have to reach out, as you say, with a user-centric approach and reach them where they are to bring them on the journey that you mentioned. And like Zubair said, like a lot of people don't necessarily think of education equality as being super important. And sometimes you've got to meet them where they are to persuade them that actually there's a different way of doing things. Zubair, you've been immensely creative, crowdsourcing resources, all sorts of different things. Tell us a bit about the creativity that you bring to Zenote and why that's been so effective.
There is so much value when it comes to meeting people where they are. There's so much value in meeting people who face the problems rather than coming up with solutions in silo. This is something that education in general is facing, and I look to EdTech, which is often translating or just simply digitizing old practices versus rethinking what education can look like with this new technology. We sit in Zoom lessons with hundreds of people with cameras switched off and don't consider the fact that how impressive is it that now, more than ever before, we can actually engage with 100 individual data points and actually get feedback and insights and actually cater a lesson which is much, much more personalized. For so many years, we were told that accessibility needs cannot be met for students because it just was not possible for a school to do so. Students or young people with healthcare issues or challenges, which meant that they would be in hospitals for long periods of time, would have to skip grades because they simply could not keep up with school. They would just be left behind. And suddenly technology has shown that there are opportunities, that this kind of, this no that we came up with was simply because we did not want to think outside the system or the box that we were put into. So it is an incredibly exciting time for education as we get a higher uptake of EdTech. But I want to just ensure that, and I want to kind of focus on the point that we must think about education and educational technology as not simply things to, make existing practices more efficient, but actually rethink what can we do with the power of AI, what can we do with AR and VR, and what can we do to address those who will be left behind. Not just technology for those who have iPads and Macs to be kind of like thrown around, but those who may not have the latest technologies. How can we make sure that they can also have that same quality educational experience?
So finally, I really want to embrace the theme of the ElectHER Festival and just kind of in one sentence ask you to share with our audience today the big vision that you have.
So I think for me it would be, imagine if 50% of legislators across African parliaments are women. Just imagine the impact on healthcare, on education, on poverty alleviation. Yeah, I think that's what I imagine. A world where women and women can sit together at a table to make decisions. Yeah.
Fantastic. And Zubair, what is your Imagine If vision?
Imagine if educational inequality was a thing of the past and we could ensure equitable quality education for all.
Well, thank you so much, Ibijoke and Zubair. That was such an inspiring session. I've got so many things to go away and think about in terms of how we might ensure that every child in the world grows up with the same quality of education, and that we could raise young girls who are able to look at leadership, look at parliaments, look at boards and see equal female representation around the world. So those are two fantastic visions to leave you all with today. Thank you to my panelists. I've been Ella Robertson-McKay from One Young World, and we hope to see you all very soon.